After lunch. So, as it says on the screen up there, this session is about the Code of Practice. Now, Tracy has introduced this topic, and I've had a chance to speak to some of you. Oh, we're now live. My name is Vivian King, and if I can introduce my colleague Sophie Taysom, we're both with the Good Economy. And we've been asked by UKAA to support the development of a Code of Practice. The conversations we've had with the UKAA are really around the growth of the BTR sector. And with that growth, there's a greater likelihood of different judgments being taken by different BTR enterprises and to reflect your own particular circumstances. And as a consequence of that, there's a greater likelihood of inconsistency at a time when really, in order to be persuasive, the sector needs to be talking with one voice and one narrative, as Brendan has referred to a number of times this morning. So the UKA has decided to initiate an independently driven code of practice in order to manage that and to come out with a position which can form the foundation of that narrative for your various audiences. So Sophie and I are going to go through a conversation with you now. We have 30 minutes-ish, which isn't long enough for this topic, but it's 30 minutes, and it's great to have you all here contributing. We're going to go through the purpose of it. We'll talk about some of the priorities that have come out through the interviews that Sophie and I have conducted with various members, and the benefits and risks that people have seen from that. And then from that, the principles as they're starting to develop. And we really want to get your feedback on that and whether they would be the principles that you would choose and whether they are your priorities. If we have time, we will go on to how on earth do you manage a code once you've got one in place. But really the priority now is what should that code say, who is it speaking to, and the function it's going to perform. So that sets the scene for this conversation. Sophie, over to you.
Good afternoon. So just to say, if you come up with thoughts after this session, do feel free to ping us an email or give us a quick shout or feedback to Brendan or Graham. So really, here I'll just be explaining a bit about the purpose of a code. So essentially, we're developing a code to support a consistency of approach and also very much for there to be consistent expectations of the build-to-rent sector. The audience is quite broad, obviously, because we're talking about particularly that sort of external audience. We're talking about customers, government, both central government as well as local authorities, other sorts of decision makers, a range of investors, and there will be many others sort of in those various buckets. And this is really important, I think, to do now. As you'll all be aware, this is quite a new sector in the UK. It still only has a bit under sort of 1% of the resi market, but it's growing very quickly. And obviously, in terms of investment inflows, they're pretty much going through the roof at the moment. So it's very, very fast moving. The other thing you'll be aware of is there can be quite a big misunderstanding about what BTR is and what the offer is. And I think a lot of confusion about how it sits as part of the overall sort of housing offer. So the approach being taken is to develop a code that will work for investors, developers and operators. So it's really around sort of building public trust. I think that governance piece is really important and demonstrating the professional impact. Something that has come out very strongly in all our discussions is really also about sharing the sort of the positioning around the quality offer and the professionalism of the offer right across the BTR sector. So at this point, it's open. How does that sort of smell, feel, what have you, for you? Anyone want to jump in? Does that sort of make sense? Is it?
Yeah. As a growing industry, we need something that's going to.
I'll give you that. As a growing industry, I think we need something that kind of binds us all together and also gives us that kind of pledge or promise that when we have a piece of BTR that we're going to do certain things that
Yep.
have a certain impact or are going to happen in a certain way. I think that will give us more credibility overall within the industry, and I think that then can move on to certain standards that we're all going to commit to, which will give us, again, I think more doors that will open when it comes to how we work with central and local government. If I take selective licensing as an example, you can see that PBSA are often excluded because they are under a code that they, or a scheme that they all align to.
Yeah.
And therefore that gives them that pass straight through that door. For the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. I'm ex-PBSA and I should really remember that, but there we go. But I think that will help us from BTR as we continue to grow. So I think it's key we have something that says this is actually who we are and what we stand for.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few similar points really. I think as we kind of, as an industry, we often ask for carve-outs from government, whether it be for taxes or things like selective licensing. So if we're going to be asking for those carve-outs for BTR, then we need to, have a kind of higher standard that we all adhere to, because if we're saying, there's obviously some really good landlords operating in the private rented sector as well. So what's different about BTR and what's different that we offer compared to a good landlord in the private rented sector? And I just think it's really important that we look at it through the eyes of the renters and what they want, because I think sometimes we come at it from the wrong angle, especially when you're speaking to local authorities and government, just really kind of always looking through the lens of the renter and what they want, I think will be helpful.
Great.
That's both really, really useful points. Yeah, please.
Thank you. As an architect, I'm coming at this from a design point of view.
Uh-huh.
And one of the biggest frustrations is local authorities not really understanding what BTR is. And I think of all the local authorities in the UK, only 30 have a particular BTR policy. We're doing one project in London at the moment, and we're having to take them on an education piece, basically.
Yep.
And another example is in Trafford at the moment, they're taking on a new local plan, and it's based on the London plan. The London plan is flawed, in my point of view, in terms of what BTR needs to offer. And Trafford is taking on almost the identical local plan. So we're going to have to go through the process all over again, things like number of homes per core and things which really for BTR is wrong, basically. So yeah, local authorities, I think, it needs to really up their game in terms of understanding what it is.
Sure.
Great.
You were going to say something? No?
Thank you. I think it's been a frenetic 10 to 12 years in build to rent, and I think now, even from today, you're getting the sense that people are having a chance to take a breath and realise, hang on, how are we performing as a sector? There's a lot of talking, but I think now is the time to actually walk the walk, and I don't think that's happening. There's some traditionally my market is the letting agent market, and I look now at the build to rent, and I can see there's lots of advantages in build to rent, but there are some areas where they're sadly lacking compared to the letting agent market in how they're performing and the policies and the kind of things they do. So I think there's some real gaps that a light needs to be shone on those areas to really improve.
Well, we'll come on to the priorities so we can talk about what those gaps are. Great. Any other? Oh, yes.
Is it about, I guess, keeping it to quite a high standard, so it doesn't get too, diluted with obviously lots of operators in the sector. We want to be able to kind of really maintain a really high standard. So it might be that some operators don't meet that standard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So your ask, we should set the game high. Okay. Any other comments? Well, and one of the things that's interesting, I think, Sophie, is the number of different audiences that we've identified through this conversation. So BTR is actually multifaceted. You've got to be serving a number of different external audiences, and then there are the internal participants or the stakeholders internally, and which you've referenced, Sophie. So there's a lot of people here that this code needs to work for in order to best serve the industry. Okay, right. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on and just give you some sort of flavour of the conversations that Sophie and I have been having with members of UKAA. And just to sort of run through some of the benefits, you're going to know this. This is grandmother and sucking eggs for many of you. But obviously, we've heard today about how this adds to the housing supply. I know fundamentally it absolutely does. It's a stronghold. It's a strong home for capital. It's bridging a gap in the market. It's about quality and reputation as a driver. It's a long-term interest. It's the potential to tackle what's called the missing middle, that middle market that isn't being served by affordable housing and isn't served at the luxury end. And it's a forward-thinking sector. So they're just some of the benefits. The risks, of course, well, the risks of delivery through the planning system, I think that serves the whole of the real estate industry, doesn't it? It can take a long, long time to get to market, and that has a cost associated with it. We have a culture in the UK of home ownership. I know that was probably encouraged by Margaret Thatcher, and we haven't lost it ever since. The government doesn't really understand the offer. We're talking about the fact that local authorities don't understand, the central government doesn't understand, and I suppose it falls into the sort of, the bracket of the sort of, the landlord thing, which we've got in the UK, which we've been saddled with for, hundreds of years. And then this sort of perception of luxury. There is a perception that BTR is for the luxury end of the market, and in fact, it serves a whole spectrum of the market. So those are the sorts of benefits. Those are some of the risks that we've heard. But in terms of the priorities, what were the things that kept coming through to us? And it should be that, yes, it is very, very much about quality, which Sophie has referred to. And that's quality in terms of the quality of the product, so the infrastructure, but also the quality of the service. And then around that quality of the service is about how do we ensure that we can guarantee that quality standard of service? How can we give the assurance or evidence the fact that we know there's a quality of service, but how do we demonstrate that externally? Does that need to be through a skills standard? Does there need to be a universal curriculum of training for the BTR sector, so that there can be assurances given about the profession standards that are being employed? Should there be independent accreditation? Should UKAA be the accreditor of that training? Should there be transparent sharing of data? Should we be more transparent about what we know? Individually, we all know a lot about our markets. Is that information being shared, or is there too much competitive tension in that information being shared? Should we be required to adhere to independent standards like the ISO standards or the LETI design standards? So those are very much around that sort of standard. And then, should we be known for fairness and engagement with our customers? Is that something that should be part of our sort of core values, our hallmark? And then there's a bit about how do we create the communities within our neighbourhoods? So it's very much about the additional services, the additional quality that you get when you're in a build BTR scheme. So how do we go about doing that? How do we make sure that what we're doing is actually thoughtful and it's relevant to the communities that we are serving, our customers? We need to be ensuring that we're facilitating authentic on-site community building activities that are relevant and that can bring all the different elements of those communities together. And having done that, having given them the platform, they are then able to go and run them themselves, so that it is a genuine community. It's not something that has to be manufactured by the sector and by the managers. And then going outside those neighbourhoods, how do we ensure that BTR is welcomed into the places in which it's investing, that it's seen as beneficial, that it's actually additive to those places? How does BTR support its local communities, understanding the needs in those places and understanding how BTR can serve those needs, and the local partnerships that can be developed in places in order to be able to serve them well, and then ensuring that the spaces that are created aren't only serving those neighbourhoods, but they're inclusive spaces. They're places for people to come to who are coming from outside those neighbourhoods, from outside the schemes. So those are some of the priorities that we heard. We heard many, and if we had 3 times the time, I'd take you through all of them because they're really quite inspiring. Because what they demonstrated to us was the level of ambition and commitment that members have got to ensure that actually this is something really quite outstanding, that the BTR needs to be recognised as an exemplar for this entire market. So those were the priorities, and what we'd really like to hear in a moment is your thoughts on those priorities. But Sophie's just going to talk about how we've sort of gathered so many of the issues and the expectations that we've heard, and we've started to develop a set of principles. So do you want to just mention what they are, Sophie?
Very, very top line. So the first one is definitely something around sort of customer service, the customer experience, because that's obviously at the heart of everything we all do. Picking up to one side, but sort of important to, but not necessarily core of, are those sort of ESG principles, particularly around things like environmental sustainability. So there is something around environmental performance. This is something you'll obviously all be very familiar with, particularly in terms of all the conversations around CapEx and OpEx. And I think there's a really interesting point there about data sharing, but I can go on about that at some other point. There's also something really interesting about the offer at the local authority level. So that's about enlivening, sort of local environments. It could be looking at supply chains, local employment. How do you make it's not just the building, but it's also about spaces and places. How do you make sure that customers aren't just kind of going home and then nipping to the nearest public transport and they're out of the area as fast as they can? How do you actually get them to hang around and build communities and all of those things you really need to maintain a strong offer? There's also obviously a really critical point, not always the most exciting, which is around that governance point. Because this is something that's increasingly moving up the agenda. So this is everything from supply chain management, disclosures, audits, just that sort of general risk management. And this will be particularly critical from the investment point of view, particularly where you're looking at institutional capital, particularly where those investors, for instance, will need to be complying with EU regs, forthcoming UK regs, if they're already reporting to the likes of the Global Reporting Initiative, GRESB, all of those sorts of things. So
Okay, thank you.
we've just given you a whole lot to think about. Any initial thoughts or reflections?
Please, yeah. Well, I think what would be great, once you've spoken, is perhaps, and that's given everybody time to think, if we could perhaps go around the table just to gather people's thoughts on what should the priorities for this code actually be. If you could all think of 3. Place to start.
When you're touching on how you create that community and create that area, what we often find is that the forced fun side never works. It is endless, relentless, grinding disappointment. It has to be something organic. So what we've seen in some of the sites we work in is almost community leaders in each sector who pick up whatever their speciality is and almost send it around the building in newsletters or whatever, saying, I'm a gardener, I'm going to do the gardening around here, does anyone want to help? That way you sort of people get experience with it. There's people who put on some, we'll go as far as lectures, but talks, and they explain what they do. It might be, but it's interesting. It's not someone talking about fitting windows. It's someone who's a cinematographer, and they'll have a film night, and then we'll discuss it. And the more you can involve people and the residents and their own interests, the better. There's no point saying it's Fizz Friday and bringing out a load of Prosecco when you've got when 30% of the occupants are, might be families or over 50s, over 60s, which we're increasingly seeing numbers of. So don't do forced fun is the bottom line there.
Yeah, so if we were sort of to put that into a principle, it would be enabling or facilitating, would it? That would be the role of the manager.
Yeah, so for me, it would be that on-site team and those resident service associates are knowing their residents and using that as their own strength. They don't need to think of something absolutely never seen before. They just need to know what people like and let them take it, because if they force it, it won't happen. And it's the same for when you're talking about the wider area of people not just getting home and then jumping on the tram immediately. You are obviously held back there by the size of your community and what you can do. You know, you could have a BTR site of 120 apartments and you're snookered. So that'll be a tricky one, I think, when you're looking at the code of practice, the practice and how you do it. But yeah, that's
Okay.
I've waffled on for long enough now.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Amanda. Put you on the spot, Amanda. Well, you can bring the independent view.
Well, I suppose I can. So I work for UKA, obviously, but so I'm not frontline at all. But the thing that gets me, and I've sort of seen it in other sectors of the property market over my career, is actually before you can codify, you need to define. And part of the problem is, I don't think, and this has come out today and it's come out many times, I don't think that we're clearly explaining and demonstrating what BTR is. And we've started to talk about the living sector, we started to talk about co-living and all of those things, and then, you know, single family, and there's so much out there, and it's all subtly different, but it's all the same thing. So I almost feel that the priority, not so much for what should be in the code, but the priority for the sector is to define what we're trying to codify. So that stands out to me as being really important first step, and then not forgetting the subcategories of who we represent as an organisation and the sector, everyone from, you know, the capital providers right the way through to the people that do the cleaning, and how does one grapple with that massive spectre. So I'm not trying to be negative, I just think there's some clear definitions and clear understanding of what the sector is first, and then that will make our lives a bit easier in terms of codifying that and what good practice looks like. So that's just my view.
Thank you.
So I've written down two things here. One, I think, is design-based and making best design of apartments in particular. Because I think if we have a design code that leads people down getting the apartments right, it means that we can spend more time on amenity space, which is obviously the differentiating factor from BTR schemes. And there's good apartment design, and there's very bad apartment design. We often get developments that have been designed by others, and we get offered to deliver them, and we have to take them back to basics, basically, because there's very specific ways of doing good BTR apartments. So I think it's good apartment design first, and then just reflecting on recent reports in terms of which BTR schemes come at the top of the list, and Trilogy, Allsop come to the top. And if you go there, there's very little amenity. So the reason they come top is really brilliant customer service. So relating good design and good customer service and operational efficiency. So I think in terms of design, knowing how the operators footfall on a day-to-day basis, where the bin store is, where the cleaner store is, where they do their visiting meetings separate from the co-working, because the two things are very different. You know, locating parcel storage and post boxes close to the entrance, good visual visibility, all loads of different things we can add to the design, but I think getting the apartments right first is key.
Thank you.
I'm probably just linking into how we take it forward with that, and I think to your definition of we should keep it as simple as possible, and it's kind of a Maslow hierarchy of needs. This is the bottom line that we should be.
Yeah.
This is the next step that we should be, and we should be able to take it up the pyramid, which then means it covers the breadth of the BTR business that we actually have, and is regardless of whether you have loads of amenities, no amenities, 100 homes or 800 homes, because we have a real hierarchy of
Yeah.
what we are and what we are about and what we can deliver.
Great.
So does that mean that you'd have different levels of standards? Because we're talking about taking this to a high standard, or that's the expectation. Are you suggesting we should have gradients?
I'm suggesting we should have, where if you're starting out, these are your bottom line basics in your
must do.
foundation.
Okay.
And then we layer it to get to,
Okay.
the best that we can
And
be.
do you
But they're
think-
not different levels of standards, they're different layers.
Okay. And do you think we should do that over time, or should it all be available now, and some people can plug into different layers?
I think we should define some layers first and say
Yep.
this is our foundational piece for our code of practice. If we're at 1% of the market now, as we get bigger, then those needs or those layers should obviously then increase. But I think if we're going to start, we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'd start somewhere that is simple
Great.
and clear and that is understood by everybody.
Thank you.
I think from the point of view of the standards is we need to look at the customer and the tenants of all the build-to-rent buildings. You've got to look at the standards that the teams work to, the speed of which we react to the customer and the tenant in the building. And then, as you've already touched on the experience piece as well, every building is almost like a village. They've got central areas, and it's creating because let's face it, the BTR market is always in the larger cities. And you want to create a village environment in the centre of a large city, so it's safe, it's welcoming, and it's somewhere where you want to stay and you want to retain your tenants. And from that point of view, if you focus on the customer experience and the tenant experience, then you're going to keep your tenants a lot longer, and you're not going to spend a fortune advertising for new occupiers and new tenants to actually move into.
Yeah.
And that would take into account the service streams that some of the BTR companies outsource, but then also some of the BTR companies that self-deliver. So, for example, cleaning. Okay, they employ cleaners, but what standards do those cleaners work to? So are they using BICs, or are the security teams or the duty managers on site, are they SIA licensed, are they first aid trained? And then engineering-wise, it's what can you do? And then when you look at the CSR piece, maybe in the design of the design of the buildings and the ESG piece is, do we use a district heating system so that we're reducing the costs for those tenants as well in terms of the heating and the way we move forward? So I think the challenge is all about the customer experience.
Thank you.
And doing things right, but then there's lots of other things that you could put in the background.
Great. I'm also aware that sort of we're coming to the end, and we don't want to stop you getting coffee.
Oh, I do.
Because that one.
I want to. We've got to carry on.
Well, I
Carry
mean,
on?
we could go on, but
Is everyone happy to carry on? We've got Tracy. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Cool.
Yeah, right, I'll be really quick. Okay, so Amanda, to your point around definitions, all I can say is that we spent far too long banging heads against the wall trying to come up with a definition in the original attempt at doing a BTR code back in 2013. And that's why civil servants, the greatest and the good in the civil service, couldn't crack that nut, which is why it went from being the PRS code from Coronation Street through to Get Living London. That was the way they described it back then. So I think it is important, but I think we have to probably loop back to that rather than get hung up on it now sequentially, because we'll never move forward with a code if we just keep debating what it is. So I guess we need to keep it loose and inclusive, because then that leads on to who does it apply to, and are we just talking about new buildings, or are we going to talk about other landlords of institutional scale, like the Great Estates, for example, who probably would not take kindly to being excluded from something that talks about quality and customer experience, which is what they like to think they offer too. So I think just throw that out there, that I think it needs to be broad. I agree about the operational piece. I think that's the design's really, really important. I'm an ops person, so I kind of think, yeah, great, fine, whatever. But if you don't get your operational piece right, that's where I am naturally going to bang on about the qualifications. But I think that they have a central plank of any code has got to be having qualified people, without a doubt. Otherwise, we're wasting our time, I think. And
just the customer piece, I totally agree. Just need to really set it around that and just figure out how we can weave in to a set of standards that are flexible enough to cope with all of the different actors and levels that we'll see in the industry. So like, I haven't really got any answers, but I think those are the things we need to do.
Great, thank you.
Just listening to people talk and kind of learning more and more about how built around people speak. I'm thinking about capex and opex, and on the capex front, I think built around do very well. So the design of the buildings, etc. That's they would score very highly.
Yep.
It's on the opex bit, and a bit like what Tracy was saying, that bit is powered by people.
Yep.
And that is where there are the gaps. And I think if you're talking about renter experience, that's all going to be affected by how qualified the people are in the buildings. And I think that's for me the key priority to work to start with.
Great.
So probably on the operational side as well, it's the compliance of the building, which probably needs to be looked at. We can see buildings that are not compliant, and that's due to perhaps fire doors need looking at again, and it's just been delayed and delayed, or boilers haven't been serviced and it gets delayed, and then eventually they go bang. Well, not bang, but more of a pop. But regardless, it leaves the resident without heating and hot water. Then that creates an issue. So, but that building compliance as a whole, whether it's managed by the on-site team, whether it's offset to a third party, but that as part of the standards as a whole needs to be there, because whilst I appreciate there are some measures in place at the moment with potential fines and slaps on the wrists and all that, if the sector is to grow, that needs to be managed with a bit more of an iron fist internally.
Right.
Great.
Hi. I think I've just come from a talk that was in here just now that you were facilitating, and I think it's really interesting that the two kind of things go together, because I think we need to be thinking about how we're affecting the environment and our social impact as well. So where we're building our communities, are they happy communities because they've got green spaces and they're able to safely, a single lady's safely able to go and walk around, there's less crime, are our, on an environmental side, are our cleaners using eco-friendly products? Are we reducing single-use plastics? All of those sorts of things, because we're obviously building something now that we hope will be around for a very long time, and I guess we want to make sure that those are sustainable.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think given all the noise around no-fault eviction, Section 21, an easy win to include will be something around security of tenure for residents, because I think that's really important from a political perspective as well.
We've certainly heard that from some of our conversations, which I think was really interesting. Great.
Terrific. Have we overrun?
Yes.
We've overrun. I'm very sorry. But thank you all so much. That's given us food. I mean, it sort of reinforces a lot of what we'd heard, but it's also given us some new ideas. Sophie and I are going to be here until you close. So, do catch us. We deliberately wore bright colours so you could find us in a crowd. So please do come and catch us if there's anything more to share. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.